Tonight on Nova. January 17th, 1994. Earthquake, Northridge, California. Damage in the billions. Exactly 1 year later, Kobe, Japan. Same size quake, but this time there are deaths in the thousands. What happened in Kobe could happen in LA.
If a quake like that were to strike, we could have conflagrations in the city like that.
Does an earthquake have to be a disaster? The day the earth shook.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Merck. Pharmaceutical research, improving health, extending life. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine. And by Raytheon. Through a commitment to technology, Raytheon offers a broad line of general aviation aircraft. Raytheon, expect great things. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
On January 17, 1995, Japan had its worst catastrophe since World War II. The city of Kobe was ripped apart by an earthquake of magnitude 6.9. More than 5,000 people died. One year before, to the day, Los Angeles nearly suffered the same fate.
Good morning. The time is 4:30 on Monday, January 17th.
The suburb of Northridge was hit by a quake of magnitude 6.7.
We're having an earthquake. Relax. Just stay right here. We're having an earthquake. Relax.
911. What is going on? Earthquake.
Many people were seriously injured, and 57 people died. But the city of Los Angeles itself had a narrow escape.
What I can say is we've just experienced a real whopper here. We're trying to piece everything together. What I can say is major timber.
2 cities, 2 earthquakes. Same date, same magnitude, but casualty figures that are very different. Why? Comparing the 2 earthquakes, scientists have reached conclusions that are both alarming and hopeful. A big city earthquake will happen again, but it need not cause massive loss of life. Many scientists believe that it should be possible for no one to die in an earthquake, but only if the lessons of these 2 earthquakes are learned. Only if the stories they tell are heard. A young teacher who lived through the Northridge experience, Makiko Yoshihara, later returned to Japan. She continues to teach nursery school children near her home in Kobe, 500 miles southwest of Tokyo. In the early morning of January 17, 1995, 15 miles below the surface, and almost directly under the city of Kobe, the earth was preparing to shake again. In the office of a television station, a security camera was watching.
Firstly, I was lying in bed and felt violent movements up and down and then sideways. I was very frightened. My sister was about to go to work and she was up. She yelled at me, "Big sister, get a flashlight." The crashing went on for a long time. I was very scared. My bookshelf fell down. I could hear the cupboard rattling and dishes cracking inside. I watched the TV come crashing down, and the VCR, and even the piano was moving around in its place. As to Kobe and Northridge, it seems really strange to have been in two such big quakes in my lifetime.
Outside Kobe, the first anybody knew about it was from the television network NHK. Along with the weather information, the morning show from Tokyo carried reports of an earthquake being felt all over Japan. Seismometers in central Japan were showing ground shaking at magnitude 4. But the seismometers in Kobe were silent, knocked out by the earthquake. Nobody outside the city was aware that many parts of Kobe were already on fire. Ignited by sparks from fallen power cables, broken gas mains blazed. Toppled oil stoves, recently lit for breakfast, added to the fires. 20 minutes after the event, Tokyo got through by phone to reporter Norio Seki in the Kobe newsroom. He had been asleep, waiting for his shift to start.
At first, I felt a slight movement. It occurred to me that it might be an earthquake. Then the violent shaking started, in all directions. I curled up inside my futon. The lights went out because of the violence of the shaking. I was so scared. What I remember most is that I was so scared of the darkness.
20 seconds later in Osaka, 30 miles from Kobe, staff in the NHK studio were also shaken from their desks, but to a much lesser extent. It was a full half hour later that Japan's central seismic computer plotted the epicenter, just southwest of Kobe. By now, entire sections of the city were in flames. Small fires became conflagrations. Many hundreds of people died in the fires alone. Survivors were unable to do anything but watch in stunned silence. The lack of seismic information had meant that fire and rescue services were not immediately alerted. Then, compounding the tragedy, only a few roads were open. Most were blocked by earthquake damage. When they got through, the firemen faced a classic dilemma: to help people trapped in burning buildings or to get the main fires under control. They were well equipped, but not for a battle on so many fronts. They soon began to run out of water. The fires had been so large and unexpected. The emergency tanks underground were just not big enough to cope with such a demand. Dawn began to reveal the full extent of the horror. The destruction made a previously peaceful city seem like a war zone. One of the worst hit areas was the district of Nagata. This was the market arcade. surrounded by houses. Many died in their homes right here. Kobe's shoe factories with stockpiles of rubber and chemicals had provided extra fuel for the fires. An entire community had been burnt to the ground. Over 1,000 people died. Nothing like it had been seen in Japan since World War II. And the death toll was to mount further. Outside the fire-torn areas, many lay buried in rubble. Across the city, rescue work was carried out by neighbors and desperate relatives. The man is calling for his mother, buried somewhere below. NHK reporters were shocked by what they found.
I'm in the middle of this area. Please look at this. The second floor of this house just fell down. Look at it closely. The first floor collapsed, and the second floor fell down, and everything fell out. 2 people were rescued, and 1 person died.
Wood-framed buildings had simply been shaken to pieces, the contents either killing or severely injuring the occupants.
So now please, look at this over here.
On the roofs of these traditional-style houses were heavy tiles, protection against typhoons, but lethal in earthquakes. Supported only by timber posts, they were responsible for many deaths.
As you can see, the tiles were broken, and this piece of wall, it's made of straw and mud. So many old houses like this were damaged or collapsed completely. The tiles broke into pieces, and even the symbol of the house fell.
On every roof was a heavy stone ornament, symbol of life. The final toll was horrific. More than 5,400 people died. It was far worse than Northridge, where the death toll was 57. Ironically, seismologists need earthquakes in order to work out what is happening underground. Now, they understand what caused both of these earthquakes and why. One or two known faults run under Kobe itself, but there are many fault lines in the Kobe area. The whole of Japan is crisscrossed by fault lines, large and small. Japan sits on the junction of no less than 4 tectonic plates, segments of the Earth's crust. The Pacific Plate and the Philippine Sea Plate are in collision with the Eurasian Plate and the North American Plate. Each plate is forced to slide under or over the others. All this conflicting motion is responsible for the sudden movements on faults near plate boundaries, which we feel as earthquakes. Northern Japan is sitting on a corner of the North American Plate. This huge plate spans much of the Arctic and most of North America. A sliver of California is cut off by the plate boundary. San Francisco is on the edge of the plate, while the coast of Southern California is on the other side.
Los Angeles is sitting on the Pacific Ocean Plate, and it's being moved to the northwest compared to North America at a rate of just under a couple of inches a year. It's about the same rate that your fingernails grow. And in 5 to 10 million years, we're going to have Los Angeles as a suburb of San Francisco, or San Francisco as a suburb of Los Angeles, depending on your point of view. And in 50 million years or so, we'll be actually heading up into Alaska. giving up on our palm trees.
The plate junction is not straight. There's a bend near Los Angeles where the plates grind together. As in Japan, this produces cracks in the plates, just like broken crockery. Some of the fragments rise up over others, and this gradually builds mountains, both in Japan and in California. One very small part of this process was the earthquake at Northridge. As with Kobe, the seismologists had trouble locating the epicenter. Communication with some of the seismic stations was lost, and others went off scale. The traces had square tops, showing no peaks. It took nearly an hour to pinpoint the epicenter on Northridge.
The waves from it came up and hit a lot of our stations at almost the same time, and it fit the pattern for microwave noise. Basically, the computer said, the ground is moving in so many places all at once. This can't be real. This must be a glitch in the microwave system, and threw it out. So when we got in there, instead of coming up with a location like we would hope to do, we often get a location within 2 minutes. Instead, we had the system saying, oh, nothing's happened. Well, yes, there was a bit of noise in the system, nothing's happened, and we had to retrieve it.
When they went to retrieve the seismic record from the ruins of Kobe, they found they had similar problems. The seismometers had successfully survived the earthquake, but there was no communications link back to base. The traces showed that, once again, the instruments had gone off scale. The peaks had square tops, as in Northridge. The seismometers were just not sophisticated enough to cope with a massive earthquake. As many as 20 or 30 small and medium-sized earthquakes occur every day in Japan and in California. Much time and effort has been spent on searching seismic records for patterns which might help predict the big ones. No patterns have appeared. Many methods have been tried, but except by chance, not a single earthquake has yet been successfully predicted. Kobe and Northridge both lie in earthquake-prone regions, but neither is on a major fault.
Both earthquakes were rather unlikely earthquakes, which is an important point to stress, that they're not the earthquakes that most people would have said would affect either Los Angeles or Kobe. So it's important that we recognize that earthquakes will occur in unexpected places and at unexpected times.
Both earthquakes had several unexpected elements. On Awaji Island, south of the Kobe epicenter, cracks in the surface of the ground could clearly be seen. But in Kobe itself, in among the rubble, no fractures in the ground were apparent. The fault line was invisible. Without an array of seismometers, it is hard to tell how the ground has actually moved. At Yokohama University, Professor Kikuchi had a bright idea to get around the lack of information. He realized that security cameras in convenience stores would have recorded the movements of items of furniture, especially anything on wheels.
This is a film from a convenience store, which is located on the southern side of the fault line. First, this person noticed a vertical shake from the earthquake. Then the big horizontal movements came, and then the movements in other directions. These third movements reflect the movement of the fault.
The two men notice something is wrong. That's the first small shock wave. Then this trolley on wheels tries to stay where it is while all else around it moves. The place it goes to shows the direction of ground motion. The professor applied the analysis to moving objects in other stores. Then he studied the contents of the NHK studio.
Here's a person sleeping. He wakes up when the vertical movement hits. Now look at the movement of this chair. Then there is the cabinet, which moves out into the room. I thought they might show the way the fault had moved.
Plotting all this information on a map revealed the position of the fault. It was not the same as the one already known to geologists. Another similarity with Northridge.
The morning of the earthquake, we went up in a helicopter to try to find surface rupture, which helps us greatly in understanding which fault broke in the earthquake, which we were trying to determine the day of the earthquake.
They spent several hours flying around the epicentral area looking for the surface rupture. They couldn't find it.
It's one of those unfortunate instances where we had to have an earthquake to find out where the fault that broke in the earthquake was. We didn't know that the fault that broke in the Northridge earthquake existed before the earthquake.
Later, computer analysis from seismometers showed how the crack in the rock had migrated upward. Then it just faded out before it got to the surface, making it invisible to geologists. They have recently calculated that there are blind faults like this all over the Los Angeles basin. Guessing which one will produce the next earthquake is virtually impossible.
Oh my gosh.
The only certainty about a big earthquake is that smaller quakes will follow.
Okay, come on back, come on back, come on.
Scientists swarmed over the area around Northridge and recorded the inevitable aftershocks. Clustered around the original epicenter, they could be plotted in 3 dimensions.
This is the San Fernando Valley in there, and this is the main part of Los Angeles with the Santa Monica Mountains in between. And the earthquake occurred in this area. We'll be able to see below the surface of the earth now, tilting up, looking from the south. And you can see here's the earthquake started here and actually proceeded up the fault plane from the bottom to the top. We'll rotate this around by 90 degrees and look at the fault plane from side on. And you will be able to see the earthquakes lining up on the fault plane. So it started at the bottom, ruptured up to the top. This area up here to the north is the area that received the very strongest shaking. And Los Angeles, in this case, is off in this direction, so it did not receive the strongest shaking. The strongest shaking occurred in the mountains or in the northern part of the San Fernando Valley, but the main part of the city over here was spared from the strongest shaking. However, in the case of the Kobe earthquake, the fault went right through the city. The rupture was directed towards the city, and very heavy shaking occurred right in the city. In fact, the shaking in Kobe was very comparable to the shaking in the northern part of the San Fernando Valley. So in many instances, the earthquakes had very similar ground motions, but one very major difference is there were large buildings above the Kobe earthquake that were not above the Northridge earthquake.
There is a saying that earthquakes do not kill people, buildings do. In Northridge, disaster struck one of the few large complexes that had been built there. Northridge Meadows was a 3-story apartment complex. The first floor collapsed and the second floor pancaked onto the ground. 16 people died here. But there were survivors.
Wait a minute. Hold up. You underneath that? Okay, he's right underneath here.
And I went to sit up, to get up, and I realized the ceiling was on my head.
I climbed down the balcony. I grabbed my wife, ran like heck to the center of the complex.
And I was wedged between my mattress and the wall. And the mattress was up in the air, and I couldn't figure out what it was doing there, why I couldn't push it back down.
I was thrown around on my bed. The lights went out. It was black. It was so dark. I was very frightened. I thought hell had opened up and came to take me. I was convinced that I was going to die.
We've got one more spot in the kitchen that we need to cut a couple of boards if we have a chainsaw.
This was only one suburban building, and it required a major rescue operation. One of the rescuers also visited Kobe and was able to make alarming comparisons with Los Angeles.
In Kobe and Northridge earthquakes, both, we were very lucky in that the quakes occurred in early morning hours before people were in the office buildings and schools and commercial buildings. That saved a lot of lives right there. We have to consider that in Los Angeles and the United States. What happened in Kobe was they had large commercial buildings, government buildings, high-rises, collapse completely into the street or collapse 2 or 3 floors in the midsection. The same thing could happen here in Los Angeles County. A midday earthquake with people in those kind of buildings working, we're going to be faced with many, many live people trapped in massive building collapses.
This whole building in Kobe, made of concrete, collapsed backwards like a house of cards. There are plenty of buildings like this in Los Angeles. As at Northridge Meadows, Kobe rescuers found themselves searching under buildings that had simply pancaked. Usually it was caused by the failure of the first floor. Buildings just knelt on the ground. The problem was open spaces. Hotel lobbies, restaurants, shop fronts with wide space for displays, and especially buildings with garages underneath. Often there would be a soft story halfway up the building. In this one, the third story has pancaked. A whole building has a natural frequency, and if that is matched by the frequency of shaking in an earthquake, it can crack like a wine glass and collapse. In such collapses, there are few survivors. In Kobe, people live and work close together. It is densely populated, unlike Northridge, but not so different from cities like Los Angeles.
We're looking at a map of the Los Angeles region, which is centered on the San Fernando Valley, this large urbanized area here. In the case of the Northridge earthquake, the earthquake actually broke to the north so that the strong shaking was directed away from the city into these relatively lightly populated areas to the north of Los Angeles. So let's now take a look at the Kobe area, and we're looking at a map that is on the same scale as the Los Angeles map. One difference you can see immediately is that the area that's urbanized is very small by comparison. 1 million people live in this little corridor, and so the density of housing was much higher. There were many more opportunities for the earthquake to knock buildings down.
But Kobe showed that it is possible to build for earthquake protection. This market was still operating during the day of the quake, feeding the homeless survivors. While all around it was in ruins, it sustained only light damage.
We knew the foundation of this area was not firm, so we put many piles underneath to secure the building and the arcade. We made it 2 or 3 times stronger than normal. This earthquake proved our decision was right. Now we shop owners and residents are glad of our decision at that time.
We know how to build buildings well enough now. We're beginning to understand how to identify the areas that are most likely going to be damaged by earthquakes in the future. If we apply those building standards in the areas where they're needed, we should be able to survive most earthquakes without loss of life.
With older buildings, reinforcement with steel is enough to withstand most earthquakes. New buildings are already constructed to the latest earthquake codes. The lesson from Kobe is clear. Strong or reinforced buildings are less likely to kill. But it was not just buildings that fell down. One of the astonishing television images was the site of the Hanshin Expressway lying on its side. The collapse took its toll, but some survived.
It was much scarier to see the road weaving than to feel the ground shaking. I thought the quake was over. But then I felt as if my body was being pushed into the ground. 2 or 3 seconds later, I heard a huge bang. Then it was all over.
Luckiest of all were passengers in a ski tour bus returning from the mountains.
I was driving the tour bus, filled with passengers. I felt I must stop. I shut my eyes after we stopped. When I opened them again, the highway had just fallen away in front of us, and the bus was swinging over the edge.
The passengers climbed out of the back of the bus to safety. After Northridge, 11 freeways came down all over Los Angeles. Significantly, it was only those that had not been strengthened for earthquakes that fell. In Kobe, it was the same. Concrete shattered, but only on those pillars that had not been fitted with a full metal jacket. Another clear message from both quakes. In the future, no freeway bridge should fall. Most of Kobe's modern bridges stood up to the intense shaking, but the docks were almost completely destroyed. Kobe was the biggest port in Japan, with over 200 wharves handling most of Japan's export trade. The earthquake of January 17th left them with just 3. The stoppage affected the whole Japanese economy, as well as the U.S. computer industry and Boeing in Seattle. Japan's lost shipping trade was quickly picked up by Taiwan and Korea.
Another cause of the damage was the types of soils that the city is built on. They're somewhat softer than those in Northridge, and in particular some of the made-land areas in the port are places where liquefaction happened. The ground was actually shaken so hard that it flowed, and that was the major contributor to the serious economic damage in the port areas.
Soft soil actually amplifies shock waves. It makes the ground movement larger than it would be on hard soil. Tests have shown that soil becomes like a thick liquid when it's vibrated. Water, which is thinner and lighter, rises to the top. Anything heavy either sinks immediately or floats about before sinking more slowly like a waterlogged boat. This liquefaction is exactly what happened to the Kobe docks. As soon as the shaking stopped, the ground re-solidified, but the damage was done. Even in these extreme conditions, some dockside high-rises survived remarkably well with only slight damage. The reason is that their foundations were long and deep, reaching down to the bedrock below. Kobe's port is being reconstructed as quickly as possible. Japan cannot afford to have this happen again. The soil is being compacted firmly, and the new foundations are going all the way down to solid rock. Further along the harbor, a bridge was being built to the offshore island of Awaji. The epicenter of the quake was directly under the bridge. It didn't fall, but the ground moved so much that the whole island has shifted slightly, away from the mainland. The bridge will now have to be 1 meter longer. Teacher Makiko Yoshihara lives near the bridge.
Despite the fact that we live close to Awaji Island, where the epicenter was, we didn't suffer as much damage as the Hyogo Prefecture or Nagata. It was terrible there.
This curious anomaly illustrates an effect that has been puzzling seismologists. When Makiko got to her school, she was happy to find it still standing, though considerably damaged. But the area next to it had been devastated. Different parts of Kobe suffered different levels of earth shaking. Why was one area shaken into ruins and another left standing? A Japanese seismologist, Professor Irakura, has a theory that would explain the mystery. It concerns the waves that flow out in all directions from the epicenter.
A geographical description of Kobe is that there are mountains on the northern side and a sedimentary basin to the south. It is rather like this pond and the banks surrounding it. The basin contains alluvium, very soft soil, which is like the water in the pond. When the waves from the earthquake reach the edge of the basin, they ripple back, making new waves going in a different direction. We call them Banshi Sesiha, or basin-originated waves.
Waves flowing through the sedimentary soil in the basin are reflected back off the sides. Where they intersect with other waves, they increase the surface movements in irregular patterns of peaks and troughs. Kobe lies in a thin strip of land enclosed by the mountains and the sea. Earthquake waves bouncing off the mountains met the incoming waves and created peaks of damage scattered through the city. Large modern cities can be struck down in a matter of seconds. This could be Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo, or any city close to a plate boundary. On the night of the quake, 300,000 people became homeless, in addition to the 5,400 who died. 180,000 buildings were destroyed. 1 million people were without food and without water. The cost in cash was $147 billion. The problem cannot be ignored. Tokyo has been preparing for years. This is where the next major urban earthquake was expected, not Kobe. 12 million people live in Tokyo compared to Kobe's 1.5. Tokyo Metropolitan Government has a permanent staff on standby. They are trained and equipped to respond rapidly in an earthquake. One lesson learned from Kobe was that emergency supplies cannot be stored centrally. They simply won't get through. From now on, emergency rations will be stored in all schools and community centers throughout Japan. And local emergency water supplies are being reorganized so that they will never run out again. The new philosophy being applied by planners, builders, and rescue services is that an earthquake need not be a disaster. Crucial to this effort will be the work of seismologists. In this science museum, Tokyo residents can experience an earthquake themselves. They are put into rooms which are programmed to reflect the seismic waves of earthquakes. They experience the vertical jolting first. This is the primary or P wave. Then come the big horizontal secondary or S waves. The shaking lasts as long as Kobe did. Knowing what it feels like to go through an earthquake helps dispel fear. The difference between P and S waves is proving crucial to seismologists. Buried in the hills above Berkeley, California, are highly sensitive seismometers that might one day save many lives.
We want to get away from disturbances other than earthquakes as much as possible, and in particular disturbances such as wind that pushes on the mountains and simulates earthquake motions, and also from cultural noise, trucks going by and such.
These large Swiss-made seismometers are expensive. Not many have yet been deployed. They pick up the traces of every shock wave in the finest detail.
We see a succession of waves that come in and are recorded in these instruments, and from analyzing the arrival times of these waves, their amplitudes, their shapes, whether they're long waves or short waves, we can learn a lot about where the earthquake happened exactly, how big it was, and then also how the rupture proceeded.
Big as they are, these thoroughbreds are too delicate to catch the peaks of the strongest earthquake motions without going off scale. So a tougher, cheaper workhorse of a seismometer is placed alongside. This black box comes into its own only when a strong motion strikes.
We have an instrument on the floor here, strong motion instrument, and if we give it a good stamp, then in a couple of seconds, the P wave, if you will come up on the screen. And there it is.
This is the primary wave. It travels fast, and it's that first vertical jolt that people feel.
So if you know a little bit about seismology, you could create a pretty good-looking earthquake. And if I hit it...
In an earthquake, the shaking ground always moves the seismometer in a characteristic pattern.
And you can see here, this was the P wave, this is the S wave coming in afterward.
These secondary waves, which do the damage, travel more slowly.
In fact, because we can pick up waves that travel faster than others, and the first wave that arrives is not the most destructive one, we hope by being able to catch that wave quickly, broadcast this information even before most of the damage is done. We hope to be able to do this really immediately as the earthquake happens, as opposed to even a few minutes later, like we're doing today.
It's been recognized for some time that if one has seismometers near where an earthquake begins, that you can send information that the earthquake has started to areas that will eventually be shaken when the waves travel to them. The waves travel at about 2 miles per second, and the radio waves basically travel instantly. So you have the radio waves outrunning the seismic waves.
An early warning system based on P waves is already in use. The Kobe quake damaged the track of the Shinkansen high-speed bullet trains. Had the trains been running, they would have risked going straight into the damaged track. It would have meant certain death for the passengers. But Japan Rail has its own network of seismometers placed at some distance from their high-speed track. As soon as the first shock wave from a big earthquake, the P wave, is detected, all the Shinkansen trains are brought to a stop. The local trains, traveling more slowly, are brought to a halt when the violent S waves arrive. The Kobe quake struck just before the train started in the morning. Half an hour later, and the system would have been put to the test. In 1989, a warning system did save lives. The Nimitz Freeway in Oakland had collapsed during the Loma Prieta quake. Seismologists monitoring expected aftershocks were able to give rescuers 25 seconds warning before a magnitude 5 shock hit them. They had time to get safely off the damaged structure. Different information could be gathered from the S waves. using tiny seismometers from a surprising source.
What these are little solid-state accelerometers that have been developed for automobile airbag technology, so that when your car suddenly decelerates, they trigger the airbag. These things are not very sensitive at all. They're very inexpensive, and so we can put them out in urban areas in lots of places where there's trucks rolling by, lots of ground noise, and still record the earthquakes, the really big shaking that damages buildings. We're hoping to develop and deploy maybe 1,500 of them throughout the Bay Area to measure the ground motions in the places where people actually live and work during earthquakes.
They would be cheap enough to install all over California. One of their first uses would be to help prevent fires. In both Northridge and in Kobe, many gas mains and domestic pipelines ignited. Tokyo Gas already has its own network of seismometers. They are closely spaced and cover only the Tokyo district. The engineers know the soil conditions in which their pipelines are buried. When the S waves hit their seismometers, they will be able to calculate rapidly which pipelines have been damaged. They can then prevent or stop roaring street fires by cutting off the gas from different parts of the city. But that's not enough. There could still be gas in pipelines which could flow into individual homes and ignite there. So Tokyo households can now be supplied with new gas meters. Known as smart meters, they will cut off the gas to the house as soon as the shaking reaches a certain level. In Northridge, as in Kobe, the firefighters encountered major difficulties. There is a real fear that in larger cities like Los Angeles or San Francisco, it would be much worse.
We know that we're going to have to pay big attention to firefighting in an earthquake. It's going to be a fight between going after people trapped in buildings and trying to put the fires out. As you saw in Kobe, even with cool, damp weather, they had massive fire spread, massive firestorms. And with Southern California's weather patterns, if a quake like that were to strike during hot, dry Santa Ana winds that are blowing 60 or 70 miles per hour, the kind of conditions that cause our wildland conflagrations, we could potentially have conflagrations in the city like that. So we need to start looking at how we're going to dump firefighting resources into the city, how we're going to get water when our water mains are broken. Possible big-time use of firefighting water-dropping helicopters in the city.
So for the emergency services, rapid information about ground motion is crucial. The lack of seismic information in Northridge meant they did not know exactly where to go.
One of the most difficult things to do is to know where to begin to look for the most likely damage. We weren't quite there on the morning of January 17th, 1994. We could tell that we should be looking in the Santa Monica area or in the San Fernando Valley area, but we think it's a very small step, given the capabilities we now have, to actually being able to begin to assign emergency resources essentially on the basis of computer simulations and modeling of what we think will happen.
This is the power and natural gas.
A team of software engineers is designing a new computer system to take instant seismic data and superimpose it onto existing maps. Roads, gas pipelines, housing, population densities, even language groupings. The system will then estimate where the damage will be in a matter of seconds.
Probably make it to the airport in about 20 minutes.
This information can be taken out into the field by search and rescue teams in their laptop computers. Their maps could show them not only which street to go to and which buildings are likely to have collapsed, but could include current helicopter pictures of the damaged area. In some circumstances, they could be told which desk a person was sitting at when the earthquake started. Special urban search and rescue teams have been formed in California as a result of experience gained in the recent earthquakes.
Well, it looks like we've got a...
They can bypass the telephone network and transmit the seismologist's information directly into their computers on site.
The speed of the response is absolutely essential. If you don't perform well in the first few hours of a major earthquake, it will be extremely difficult 8, 12, 24 hours down the line to make up for what you didn't do during those first few hours.
So what will happen in those first few hours of the next earthquake? What should happen if the knowledge we already have were applied? Some of the future is already here. Control rooms are being set up as if ready for a space flight or a war. A P-wave is recorded and instantly broadcast. The size, location, and direction of the quake is calculated within 5 seconds. An early warning is put out on all radio stations, and sirens are sounded. There is time to take cover. There is time for utility companies to stand by. Then the S-waves hit. Urban search and rescue teams have been alerted. This time, they know exactly where to go. Operations rooms are staffed and information is beginning to flow.
We'll begin the operational briefing now. Logistics. If health services is going to need some support in transporting patients, are you going to be able to handle that?
Well, we think we can probably deploy up to 3 floors support.
Gas and power lines have been cut off.
We need to coordinate as quickly as we can because those numbers may be much larger than what we've got right now.
Inevitably, some fires do break out. None of the freeway bridges are down, but some older buildings have collapsed. Rescue teams arrive within minutes.
Okay, let's go ahead and pull off. Let's get the dog team in. Okay, canines. Okay, go ahead and get that. Go right up. Ready over there.
A little bit more, Don.
Hello, is there anyone there? Can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I can see him. He's alive.
Rapid information can save lives. From new seismometers to the latest rescue equipment, the means are available to prevent even a major earthquake from becoming a disaster. But the systems are not yet in place, either in California or Japan. A catastrophe like Kobe is waiting to happen again. It could be avoided.
Educators and home viewers can purchase this and many other NOVA programs for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-255-9424. Nova is a production of WGBH Boston. Funding for Nova is provided by Raytheon. Through a commitment to technology, Raytheon offers a broad line of general aviation aircraft. Raytheon, expect great things. And by Merck. Pharmaceutical research, improving health, extending life. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine. Major funding for Nova is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
This is PBS.
Next time on Nova, James Randi, magician and investigator of psychic phenomena, explore the world of the paranormal, examine supernatural claims. Will Randi finally solve the secrets of the psychics? That's next time on Nova.
For more information about Nova, visit the PBS homepage on the World Wide Web at www.pbs.org. For transcripts of Nova programs, call 1-800-831-9000.